Joseph Smith was the architect of Nauvoo and is given credit for that.
The areas around Nauvoo are larger than the counties of Chicago.
They called it Og. They called it the strange fever.
Everyone is experiencing the death of their loved ones.
Save your dead, and we will bury them on Mondays and Thursdays.
Joseph's Nauvoo sermons talk a lot about death.
In those funeral sermons is where he introduces what we call temple work today.
Her son was 9 and he wasn't baptized.
She is credited then with being the first to perform baptisms for the dead by proxy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Every man 18 to 45 is invited to be in the Nauvoo Legion. The women used to say he was the most handsomest man in Nauvoo as long as he was wearing his Nauvoo Legion uniform.
The church is growing at an enormous rate.
Average age in Nauvoo, you got to be about 26.
Wow. We've got 16,850 members by 1840.
There's such a sense of awe for these early saints, for that generation.
Hello and welcome back to Scripture Central. I'm Lynne Hilton Wilson, and today I am so happy to have Susan Easton Black here with us to talk about Nauvoo. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Lynn. It's great to be here.
Oh, and we will be giving some historical background because we haven't been in Nauvoo yet. We've had a long span of church history, but Section 124 mentions the baptism of the dead. We hope to get in that, but I want to go back to 1839 and give us some historical background before we jump into some of the Nauvoo history.
Okay.
So I've got a little timeline here. My handout also has the timeline if you'd like to check into it for more detail. But let's go back to 1839. It's May 10th. Joseph is out of prison, out of Liberty Jail, and he and his family move north along the Mississippi River up to an area of Commerce, Illinois. And the saints follow him. Unfortunately, in the muggy hot summer, the malaria, they don't know what's coming with mosquitoes. It was just awful. And on July 21st, even Joseph is down, and there is a day of healing. And hundreds of saints on both sides of the Mississippi are healed on that miraculous day of healing. By August and September, 7 of the 12 apostles have left on their missions for the British Isles. We talked about that a little bit earlier with Alex Baugh. That was an exciting part of our history. October 29th, Joseph, Sidney, and Elias Higbee leave Nauvoo to present their petitions of redress to the United States President Martin Van Buren and to members of Congress. On November 28th, they arrive in D.C., and on the 29th, they have asked Congressman Reynolds to escort them as Joseph and Elias go in to meet President Martin Van Buren. December 5th, Joseph writes to Hiram with the details about what the president said, and by 1840, he leaves and comes back to the saints, leaving Brother Higbee there to take care of everything else, and with meeting Henry Clay, Judge Stephen Douglas, and we just don't get very far. In February, Joseph left D.C. and returned home to Nauvoo, and by March 4th, he arrived in Nauvoo, but Brother Higbee stayed for another month in D.C. Now let's just go back to arriving in Nauvoo. Tell me about some of these names. Now, we know what Nauvoo is, but what were some of the earlier names, Susan?
So Nauvoo was what was considered part of the half-breed tract.
Half-breed?
Uh-huh. So at that time in the United States, a great deal of prejudice occurred between the Native Americans and the, quote, white settlers.
Okay.
And so if they had a child, where could the half-breeds live in the 26 states of the United States and not be forced out to the Indian Territory? And they could always live somewhere in that state. And typically, the places that were selected were places like swamps, mountaintops, the most
not
undesirable.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
And so Nauvoo was one of those places. It had an Indian name first.
Oh, really?
And after that, it was named by the Sac and Fox Indians. And your first white settler to move to the area was named Dennis Julian. He had been down at Fort St. Louis, and came up to what we call Nauvoo, and he set up a fur trading place, and he hired many Native Americans and also some of the white settlers moving in. And then after he left, you got your first permanent settler who decided, what could I name this place that would attract other permanent settlers? And his name was James White, and he decided to name his town Venus.
Oh.
And so you'd think, how do you attract a man to go west? And
Venus.
Yes, you've got to name your town after something that would attract people to come your way. So you'd get.
We've already talked about how people were very interested in the ancient Greek and Roman and even the Egyptian stuff right now. So this is all in keeping with the interest of early Americana.
Exactly. And
Venus.
So
okay.
if you're going to get a man to go west, if he liked what he saw, he would then return and get his wife and sweetheart. And just sometimes they were the one and the same. So as they arrived in this town, suddenly they're feeling sick because it's swampland.
Yeah.
And so they came up with the idea, how do you get above the swamp? And the answer was to build 2-story houses. And so they built a second floor. And when they found themselves still sick, they're now moving out. And as they move out, here come land speculators who can see houses there, and basically it's houses for the taking. And so by this point in the history of the United States, what can we name this area? Because people are getting smarter, and their conclusion was, let's call it Commerce.
It's right on the Mississippi.
It's right
that
on the
makes
Mississippi.
sense.
We're going to be the next big stop since St. Louis, and their plan was, we're going to go east, and at that time, a lot of rich people lived in Connecticut. So the plan was, we're going to go east, we're going to sell the land to people who will never see it. We call it Commerce, and they just wrote it out on pieces of paper with streets as if there were streets, a big canal going down the middle. And unfortunately for them, the year was 1839. And there was a run on the banks. And with the run on the banks, even people in Connecticut and other places are saying, this is not our year to invest. So suddenly, you get these land speculators, one being named Isaac Galland, who is looking for, where can I unload my property, as many as 19,000 acres.
Wow.
And where is there a people desperate enough that can see the land and know that it's undesirable? And you'd say it's Latter-day Saints coming straight off an extermination order there from the state of Missouri.
Who are now living in Quincy looking for land.
And they're looking for land. So when the Saints arrive, Joseph moves in. It's called Commerce. He eventually names it Nauvoo. After his death, Brigham Young names the very same piece of land, City of Joseph.
Yeah.
And today we call it Nauvoo.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, and they didn't realize what was causing malaria. I'm glad they thought about the second floor home, though. But didn't they just leave the muddy, swampy lands and realize that they weren't getting as sick up on the hills? Or I guess
right. In other words, they could have moved up on the bluff.
Yeah.
But the river's so close because you need the water, the bathing, the fishing, everything with it. And you'll notice that when Joseph arrives in town, he's going to organize people, particularly the quorums of the 70s.
Yes.
Which will eventually be 35 quorums of the 70s in Nauvoo. And he will organize them into to groups that will dig ditches to drain the swamps.
Yeah.
And you can still see some of those ditches, like along the main highway going into town. And you'd say that traces back to the Saints.
To the Saints. And it was the 70 who were the ditch diggers.
Yep, the 70s were the ditch diggers.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm interested. Joseph says sometimes in his sermons, some of you who are not as used to the river waters need to move up here or away from the river, whatever. So I know that they couldn't figure out what was causing it, but they
Yeah,
realized it had something to do with the swampland.
Yes.
And that's why they go through it, yeah.
Right. And so they called it Og. They called it the strange fever.
Yeah.
Some would say once they had settled in commerce that they would rather face the sheen of the swords and the guns than to face something that they couldn't identify.
Oh.
So what you get is the saints' first move there is death and dying, And so Joseph began to say to them, keep your dead. In other words, what's going to stop a community from building? Is it a marriage? And you go, no, you're just running over for the marriage and going home. But if someone dies, we'll look at local wards. We all get into it. We all want to help. We want to be a part. Yeah. And so Joseph, by the time they've been there a couple of months, will conclude, save your dead, and we will bury them on Mondays and Thursdays.
Wow.
And you get the idea. Joseph is becoming very Israelite in his thinking, even though we can trace it back to Kirtland. But Thursday is a traditional day when Moses climbs Mount Sinai. And, Monday's a traditional day. He comes down with the Ten Commandments.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So it all relates to the burial sites.
The other thing that I love about these early Nauvoo days is we finally start getting Joseph's sermons recorded. Right. Because he wasn't the main voice early on. It was Sidney or Oliver, whomever. But the Nauvoo sermons begin very early in 1839. And I keep thinking how many people were sick that were out there trying to listen to these, But I have just loved the Joseph Smith Papers projects, being able to go and see them in a group. Remember one semester at Institute, I just studied all of Joseph's Nauvoo sermons, and he does talk a lot about the death. And I think because everyone is experiencing the death of their loved ones is not only what motivated the faith for the day of healing just a few months later in June, but it also motivated all the prayers that opened the hearts for the doctrine of the baptism of the dead.
Yes. In fact, if you were to look at where are the sacred places in Nauvoo, one point I'm with President Hinckley, and he used to say, there are only two places I need to see in Nauvoo. One, obviously, the temple, and the other is any graveyard.
A grave
because
site.
In the grave sites, if you look at the sermons of Joseph, you couldn't always count that he was going to speak on a Sunday in a grove. But if there was a funeral, that's where you're going to get a lot of these sermons. And in those funeral sermons is where he introduces what we call temple work today.
Yes.
The thoughts about families, the thoughts about relationships.
Okay, so whose funeral sermon? Wasn't it?
It's Seymour Bronson.
That's right, Seymour Bronson.
Yeah. So if you were to look at the many funerals held in Nauvoo, the two where you'd say the longest processionals, where you could look and say how many people, and you'd say obviously the longest will be Joseph and Hiram and the martyrdom. But the second will be Seymour Bronson, but he's not the only one being buried, right? These Monday and Thursday, you saved your death, right?
I would have thought it would have been Father Smith, but it's Seymour Bronson,
Yeah,
huh?
Seymour Bronson. It's over a mile long, and they head out to the burial site, and the bodies there are in what we would call their caskets. And Joseph's giving a sermon. As he does so, he introduces the doctrine of baptisms for the dead. And one of those,
and what year is this?
So we're back in 1840.
Okay.
So it's not till that. It's in September.
Great.
And Seymour Bronson, he'd been on the High Council there in Commerce. He actually was the one that brought charges against Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, there in Far West.
Wow.
But he'd been also a bodyguard for Joseph Smith. But at his funeral, others were being buried, and as Joseph introduced, spoke about Corinthians, right? About if the dead rise not at all, why are we,
Corinthians 15:29.
That's it.
1 Corinthians.
And anyway, and so one of the women there was Jane Nyman, and she was burying her 9-year-old son, Cyrus Livingston Lyman. And when she hears this, she turns to a priesthood man named Harvey Olmsted, and she said, "Take me down to the river, the Mississippi, and baptize me for my son." And so she is credited then with being the first to perform baptisms for the dead by proxy.
And she was able to do it for her son in those day and
Right,
ages,
right.
male for female.
I
guess
I don't
people
think it
were
would fly today, right?
No,
Right.
but people were so excited that she just heard the doctrine and said, "Take me down."
Right.
And yet her son was 9 and he wasn't baptized.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Oh, what
And
a
then
story.
from then on, you get, there's a place in Nauvoo that we affectionately call Baptism Beach.
Okay.
But you get, here'd be Joseph Smith lined up, and a few yards from him would be another person, another person, another person. I've had an opportunity to look at the baptismal records and put together 6 volumes of them. And what was so kind of astonishing to me was the sheer number of people that wanted to
6 volumes.
Yeah, that wanted to do baptisms for the dead, literally thousands. But I was also impressed with how they actually knew their ancestry way back. Like there was one man that could name 32 generations
Just by memory.
just by memory.
Wow.
As he's being baptized in the river again and again. And so, as opposed to today, how many know the full name of their grandmother or great-great-grandmother, right?
Oh, wow. Well, as long as I got my phone handy, I could look it up, you know.
Yeah, you can look it up, right?
Wow. 32 generations.
And they also did it for their friend. But you begin to see kind of repetitive baptism. The man who more baptisms were performed for him than any other person, and it was George Washington.
Oh.
Including Don Carlos Smith,
Was baptized for George?
Yeah.
Oh.
And Don Carlos, the women used to say he was the most handsomest man in Nauvoo as long as he was wearing his Nauvoo Legion uniform. So probably appropriate he's done the work for George Washington.
Oh, that's great. Oh, what a sweet experience to go through those names. The enthusiasm the saints had initially didn't seem to wane because as I was looking through Joseph's sermons, he says, "I've told you to leave the river and go into the
wooden font.
The wooden font."
Yeah.
And I
On
guess
Temple
the
Square.
wooden font stank. I mean, they didn't want to use it because it was leaking and it was wood,
Yeah, it was wood.
And so it was growing mildew or something. Anyway, they didn't want to use it. And Joseph keeps saying, "Get out of the river. The Lord told you to stay here in the temple." What are some of the stories about that? The wooden font.
So the wooden font, you get the Nauvoo Temple. It's the only church structure I know like this, but the wooden font, they were so anxious to do baptisms for the dead. They actually had a pitched roof, kind of wood-clapped building on Temple Square, and they were building the temple around it. And they eventually had to remove the building so they could put in for the floor, for the second floor. So there was actually a building there. You could go and you could see laborers laboring with the limestone to be able to build the Nauvoo
So you hear the
Temple.
tapping while you're doing your baptisms
Right.
for the dead.
And then you'd say, then there's a lineup ready to go and be
Well,
baptized
as you
for the
described
dead.
on the river, groups of hundreds of people baptizing
Hundreds of
lined up. And in the font, you only have one. I mean, there must have been a long line then.
I figure a pretty long line.
Yeah, for people.
Hey, you get Emma Smith does the work when she learns about the death of her father and mother. She does the work for them.
Oh, the Hales.
Yeah.
Elizabeth and Isaac
Isaac,
Hale were
yep.
baptized by Emma. Yeah. And she could do her father as well?
At that time.
At that time?
Yep.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. So she was very involved in that. And did they have children? Did they have youth, teenagers doing baptisms? Or all adults?
We can find teenagers doing it. We can't find children doing baptisms for the dead.
Okay. So, which is consistent with today's day and age almost.
Right.
I also was interested to see the growth of Nauvoo. I've looked at the numbers of church membership, and we always increase every year a little bit. But Nauvoo, we have some leaps and bounds.
Right.
And I keep thinking, when I go to Nauvoo now, which I absolutely love doing, and I've met you there on multiple times, the brick buildings are lovely, but you always were careful to say, Lynne, they were wooden shacks. There were very few brick buildings. Tell us about this. Now, was Joseph an architect? How did this all work?
Okay, so Joseph Smith was the architect of Nauvoo and is given credit for that. He's actually naming streets. And you get a street named Parley, right?
Yeah.
And
Hyde.
Hyde. You get a Don Carlos Street, you get a Samuel Street. So he's got all these different. You get Durfee Street. But Nauvoo, it was kind of like the first saints coming to Nauvoo are those that have come up from Quincy, right?
Uh-huh.
But remember, we're always a missionary church. We're baptizing people. And people we baptize, your number one occupation in America was to be a farmer.
Right.
And Nauvoo only has X number of acres. So here comes your new convert, and it's where am I going to live? Yeah. And pretty soon, Joseph Smith will found, here's your Nauvoo River. He will found 23 communities on the Nauvoo side of the river. And you'd say there's 15 communities on the Iowa side of the Mississippi River. And so you'd say you get Yellowrome, which is Morley spelled backwards. You get a Mormontown, you get Bear Creek, you get Ramus, it just goes on and on, Webster.
Don't we have Zarahemla too?
Yeah, we have a Zarahemla across the river.
Yeah.
We've got a Payson. Anyway, all kinds of these little communities. And if you were to say, do the communities have a main street, a downtown? And only Yellowrome had 4 stores. So you'd say, why would you come into Nauvoo? One, every man 18 to 45 is invited to be in the Nauvoo Legion. So that would get you in for parade times, which would be April, July, October, right?
Well, if these other places didn't have stores, I assume you'd come in to buy your sugar and your flour,
you would come
your
in
lumber.
Like, for example, we've all seen Joseph Smith's little red brick store.
Yeah.
It was a general store. There were 38 general stores.
In Nauvoo?
In Nauvoo. So
38?
Nauvoo is your metropolitan place. It's your place to shop. Where are you going to bury your dead? You're going to bring them up from all these places. You're going to bury them in Nauvoo. If you need services, such as you need a dentist, a lawyer, it's Nauvoo. If you need a place to stay while you're there, you have the Mammoth Hotel, had 50 rooms, and there were 4 hotels. If you need your flour sent to the mill, it's Nauvoo. If you want to help build on the temple, it's Nauvoo. If you want to come in for conference time, and it's always Nauvoo. So notice in Nauvoo is when conference times become standardized.
And also the Mississippi would allow transportation, that it's not too hot or too cold. They're better months. You don't have as much cholera in either of those 2 months, I would hope, at that day and age.
And so people like Joseph Smith, they have a home in town and a home on the farm. So Hiram Smith has a home in town. He lives in town in the winter, and then he lives on his farm. In his case, his farm and Joseph's were on the outskirts of Nauvoo, and so they would live in their farmhouse, but they would live in it they're in their farmhouse from April to October. From October to April, they're in town. So when is Nauvoo bustling with people?
The winter.
It's the winter.
And there you don't have the problems with the malaria.
The malaria, right? Because you've gone out into the farmland. And so you'd say...
And there people have their own wells, and so it's a little bit... You don't have the water issues of pure water either that also plague them.
Because you're spread out, but then thousands would come in for conference.
I love it.
And then they would get the callings, so Nauvoo has a library, Nauvoo has a cultural hall, Nauvoo has a music hall that seats 600. You want cultural events. So you get the idea. people are farmers. They spread out during the, early spring through fall.
Yeah.
They come into town for all their cultural. When does education start? The University of the City of Nauvoo, classes are held in the winter. What about the seminary of that university? It's in the winter. What about the common schools, private schools? It's your winter months when everyone's back in town.
Oh, great. So we know that the ferries were popular.
Right.
But because the weather was colder, I've done a little bit of looking. The Mississippi froze multiple times
Right.
in those winter months that would have allowed you to come over. And in fact, just this year in January, I was there when the Mississippi, it wasn't frozen all the way across, but it was frozen out enough that I was able to walk out quite a ways.
Okay, it's pretty amazing. When it freezes and then eventually gets to the middle, it forms like hills, like they're cracking all up, it just goes up. It's like it goes and then it all kind of comes back out.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful sight.
Yeah, it is a beautiful city. I didn't realize. But this, I assume, though, from what I've read, that the diseases were really under control after 2 or 3 years once the canals. I mean, I'm sure still some people are getting malaria.
Right, but it's more
it
controlled.
Was not as saturating of every family was losing people during that first year or two.
Right. Things get a whole bunch better.
Yeah.
And especially as they move out.
And, I was a little bit sad that we aren't getting more revelations during this time period, but the church is growing at an enormous rate.
Massive.
We've already got a very good foundation, and Joseph's sermons often introduce beautiful new doctrines. I was interested to look to see how many of his sermons talk about the Holy Ghost. Because do you remember when he was back in Washington, D.C., what he told the president was the difference between our church and others is the gift, our mode of baptism and the gift of the Holy Ghost. And then I noticed he starts speaking on this more, and he starts speaking on the Holy Spirit of promise. And he's asking us to make this greater effort to seek to have the Lord's companionship. And the church is not only growing because we are in a sort of a safe place, but I think they're coming in because they want to hear Joseph and they feel the Spirit of the Lord. I was looking at the numbers. We've got 16,850 members by 1840.
Yep.
We are, and then by the time Joseph dies, we're in the 20,000s. So what's this statistic about, at one point, the areas around Nauvoo are larger than the counties of Chicago, the county of Hancock?
Okay, good. All right, so Nauvoo is in Hancock County. And you'd say Nauvoo was the largest community in Hancock County. But when they come to the idea, Nauvoo rivals Chicago in size. So remember all those little towns I put out here that are coming way out here, you'd say Joseph and Hiram die, and we're still out there in all those communities.
Yeah.
When does Nauvoo become large enough that people say it rivals Chicago? Not during the lifetime of Joseph Smith, because we're spreading out, kind of like, the best example, pioneers come to Salt Lake, they're told, now go settle Willard, settle Logan, settle Provo.
Lehigh.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and so it was the same kind of thing. But when you get the death of Edmund Durfee, who becomes the first martyr to mob mentality.
In Nauvoo.
He dies out in Yellowstone, one of these little communities.
Okay.
Brigham Young will say, everyone come in.
So this is 1844?
You're back 1845.
Okay.
So when 1845 hits and Brigham says, come in, suddenly, all these little, it's kind of like a wagon wheel.
Yeah.
Here's your wheel. Nauvoo's the center, the hub. And then here's all your spoke communities. When Edmund Durfee dies, it's like the spokes all collapse. Oh. So today, you can go to some of these little areas and you go, this was once where my ancestor lived, and no more. There's nothing there. It's just, soybeans, corn,
Yeah, beautiful farmland.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was that come in. And once they come in, then Nauvoo gets a population that's now in big thousands.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I know that by June of 1840, the records say there's like 250 homes or something, but we have thousands of people. Where are they living?
Okay. I think we know that they're spreading out, but as they did so, you realize your first homes are going to be lean-tos, they're log cabins, or block houses. And then everybody at first was given 4 acres, but pretty soon they've got a cousin or somebody in there. But the ideal was you'd have a house, you'd have your barn, you'd have your shop. So house, barn, shop on those acres, and then you would have a vegetable garden and maybe a few fruit trees. So everything on your 4 acres would literally sustain your family.
Wow.
Okay. But, that's your ideal. In reality, it doesn't quite work that way. But you can tell when the family begins to prosper. They go from the log cabin to a block house. It's more than the rolled logs. It's, kind of planned out, and to a clapboard house. And then if you were really successful, a brick house. But most of the brick houses don't happen until after the death of Joseph Smith. And so what causes people to want to make a permanent structure, even though they know they are weeks, months away from leaving, right, is because Brigham wants them to build their memory of Joseph Smith. Like at one point, Wilford Woodruff built, he claimed to use the most bricks, even though John D. Lee had a house with 23 rooms, which you'd say larger, right?
Yeah.
But Wilford counted every brick that went into his house and made sure that the walls were 8 bricks thick. And he just he personally wanted to know that he had the biggest memory of Joseph Smith.
Oh, but bricks were so hard to come by. I assume with the swampland they had the right kind of soil to make them, but it takes a long time to make enough bricks to build a house.
To build a house, yes. And then to go and get enough bricks and bring it back to your house, put them in, and get the next one. So they had 4 brickyards in Nauvoo, going as a constant. Once Joseph had died. So
who was the most needed? Was it bricklayers or were they lumber yards, or who was the most needed job in the community?
The bricklayers, that was a big job. But pretty soon, because people know they're going west, it's got to be your wagon makers.
Okay.
That becomes a really big job. And pretty soon, as people come in, you would take, as they collapsed all these spoke communities, as you would take people into your home. You would take them in your home, and then suddenly what had been your parlor, or we would call a front room.
It's now an extra bedroom now.
Right. It's there's bedroom, and everybody's working on spokes. To get ready to go so that you can take it to the Wainwright and get your wheel and get your box and ready to move out.
Yeah. Oh, so interesting. Let's go back to section 124 for a minute.
Okay.
So they begin mentioning baptisms for the dead then, but we get more about it in 127, right?
Right.
So the Lord just keeps giving more and more information on it?
I think the real concern was they needed to keep an accurate record. And I think it's so interesting that, there were different people that, of course, would write in their journals. Yeah. But we know that William Weeks becomes the architect of the Nauvoo Temple. And years ago, I actually lived in his house. There were different architects in Nauvoo. And why would he be chosen? He's one of the ones that went down to the river and started asking people, here's our date. Who are you and who did you baptize? And it's like he had a spirit of the temple work before he began working on Joseph's plan.
So he already was a very organized man, obviously, and he had paper available, and he's recording things. So he's probably fairly educated as well. What would have helped.
I see him.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I guess everybody was sort of had the spirit of building. I love the stories about building the temple. They say Joseph was in his frock in the quarries as well as everybody else. Right. And can you tell us a little bit about that enthusiasm in the community?
Okay. They called them public works. There were different buildings that people were asked to work on. So you'd say one, we now call it the cultural hall, the music hall. Those would be some the drainage ditches, but nothing captured the imagination, the inspiration as the Nauvoo Temple.
Yeah.
That would be your favorite. And they've got, there were 4 different quarries. And what I think was so interesting, they would push and pull those large limestone blocks up to the 4-acre place that
Surrounding the temple?
well, the acre blocks, and it was a 4-acre block that Daniel H. Wells gave the prophet Joseph Smith to build the temple on. And at the time, Daniel H. Wells was not a member of the church, but it was this tall knoll. And you'd say the excitement to be able to build that temple and to help those who had the skills. And I think you get a fourth of Nauvoo actually becomes English born and bred. And they brought over the talent to be able to,
the stonemasons
to do the stones.
From Great
Yes.
Britain and the Industrial Revolution and all those saints coming from up north.
They're the ones that put the faces on the
Sunstones.
sunstones and, get the stars just right.
And the symbolism of the sun and the moon and the stars is still in our temple today. I
Yeah, it's
love
so
the fact
beautiful.
that they repeated that. I remember one time you were telling me about when a great big stone would be coming up with the ox carts and everything, that the saints would come out and sing or something?
They would sing.
What did they sing? I don't remember.
They would sing the Spirit of God.
Oh, in
Like a
preparation
fire's
for the
burning because,
temple.
Written for then the Kirtland Temple, right? And continued on. That became a very favorite song. Another song they would sing is How Firm a Foundation.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I like that one.
Now, would they be working on the temple in the wintertime as well?
They would work on the temple as long as they could. They even would have fires in each of the 4 corners so they could work on it in the evening hours.
Wow.
Where they have the big fire pots.
Wow. Okay.
The temple, will finally be finished after the saints have left. Mm-hmm. And so you'd say the floor that was finished so that the saints could go in and receive their own endowments would be the 3rd floor. So the 1st and 2nd floor were not completed as the saints, flee Babylon by land or by sea.
Now, I presume the baptismal font was down on the 1st floor?
Baptismal font in the basement.
Okay.
Yeah, and but that kind of work was kind of put to the side as Brigham Young indicated he was going west to fulfill Joseph Smith's Rocky Mountain prophecy, and that he wanted to go west. He wanted to take a people, but he would not take them unless he'd been endowed.
Yeah.
And so suddenly the emphasis now turns to you've done preliminary work for your ancestors. Now it's time to do it for yourself because we're about to go 1,400 miles out to where it's not really civilization.
Yeah. Is there anything else about the 1839, 1840, 1841s that you...
Average age in Nauvoo, you got to be about 26.
Wow.
So we're looking at, a younger society that can actually cross those plains, right?
Yes.
And a lot of children.
Very vibrant. And
One of their favorite things was dances. Where you'd say people my age, they probably might not choose it. Right?
Oh, I love it. That's terrific. So if we've got people coming up, they haven't had their own farms down in Quincy. So by the time they're coming up in 1839, they're having to prepare their own foods. Fortunately, it's now in the springtime, so they can start planting.
Right.
But this is the frontier, isn't it? What kind of foods are they eating?
Fish from the river.
Ah, right. Good.
I remember Joseph Smith praying, thanking the Lord for the Johnny cake, but wishing he had something better. So they eventually have the pigs and cows, everything that...
Chickens, producing the eggs.
Right, and they've got the vegetables from their garden, so they're more like that.
Okay, that's
And
great.
You don't find too many shops that are selling foods.
Because people do that on their own.
That's on your own.
Okay.
We live in a society where everybody wonders where are we going to eat tonight. But back then you always knew you were eating at home.
Well, you mentioned that there were multiple hotels, and yet in Section 124, we're given specific direction on building
The Nauvoo
a
House.
beautiful place for visitors as well. or
Right, like a riverside hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about some of those people? It says that,
Sure.
I don't know how many people they list, but there's quite a few that they're told, I want you to buy stock in this
stock,
house. And it has to be
right.
between $50 and $1,500. That's a lot of money there.
That was a lot of money.
These were the wealthy people that were investing, but I didn't recognize some of their names.
Most of them, you'll find that they hold the office of 70. That was your that was your most quorums, even more than high priests or elders. And of all of those listed, I guess my favorite one would be Almon W. Babbitt.
Oh, tell me about him. I don't know anything about him.
Okay, this man, he had been an attorney and actually practiced in 5 different states, and perhaps thought he was pretty smart because of it, right? And he had actually been a stake president in Kirtland, and the time we're going to pick him up is 1844. And but in the Doctrine and Covenants 124, he is told, beware of the golden calf. In other words, beware of putting money ahead of, of your kind of spiritual life.
Yeah.
And Almon W. Babbitt was angry with Joseph Smith, and he told him, take it out.
Before or after the revelation?
After the revelation.
Okay, take it out.
Yeah, take it out. He goes, I don't want people to remember that of me. And anyway, so I've had an occasion to follow through his life, and this story takes place in 1844 in June, when Almon W. Babbitt was a branch president out in Ramus, one of those spoke communities, which is fairly close to Carthage. And Uncle John Smith visited the prophet Joseph in Carthage jail on June 26, the day before the martyrdom. And he asked Joseph, by this point, Uncle John Smith, he was a patriarch.
Oh, I thought he was stake president.
He'd also been a stake president in Zarahemla and Adam-on-Diamond. I mean, he was just a really wonderful man. And so he is asked by Joseph, what I want you to do is go find me Almon W. Babbitt and tell him I need him to defend me in a court of law, when this is coming up at why he's in Carthage jail. And so Uncle John Smith goes to see Almon W. Babbitt.
In Ramus, okay.
Yeah, just a few miles away. And he says to him, do you know that Joseph Smith and Hiram are incarcerated in Carthage jail? And Babbitt said, I know that. And he says, oh, good. He says, I've come to tell you, Joseph needs you to defend him in this court of law that's coming up. And Babbitt's comment was, oh, Uncle John, you're too late. I've already been hired by the other side. And so you get this.
And he was a branch president.
Right. So you get this kind of thing of the golden calf. And I think it's a good message for the time period in which we live.
I've already been hired by the other side.
In other words, we need to keep our priorities straight.
Wow.
As we live in the world and try to not be so much of it.
Oh. Okay, so we've got a lot of outside communities. We've got a good headquarters. I presume Joseph is speaking probably at least every Sunday, if not at the funerals as well. But when do they start establishing church groups in the exterior? Because you mentioned that Uncle John was a stake president over in Zarahemla. How did the church work like that?
So how the church works, you start to get it more organized, like Newell K. Whitney, way back when he becomes a bishop in Kirtland. Yeah. He doesn't have necessarily geographical boundaries, right? So where you get the geographical boundaries, where you could say, I'm bishop from this street to this street to this street to this street.
Is that Nauvoo?
That's Nauvoo.
Okay.
And so they divided Nauvoo originally into 4 wards, and they followed the political division. Because in Nauvoo, like when I had a house there, I was in the Nauvoo First Ward politically, but I was also in the Nauvoo First Ward in the church.
Okay.
So it was a political. Eventually, because of the growth of Nauvoo, they'll have 10 wards. But in your wards, it's not like they were autonomous because they reported to the stake, right? But inside your wards, you would select from your wards You're someone who'd be the police, who would report to the main policeman. So you kind of take care of that in your ward. You'd have your common school in your ward. So
Really?
here's
Their
my
education was
first
from the ward.
common school. Here's where we meet.
And did they educate girls as well as the boys?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay. So you'd have your schools there. Your church meetings were never just in a ward. Your church meetings were always in a grove. There wasn't a building for church. You can look back. You'd say there's the Kirtland Temple, and we have some schoolhouses that were built. But a church meeting just for a ward was in that little spoke community of Ramus. So that house still stands, the Word House. Church doesn't own it yet, but it still stands.
Great.
Yeah.
But Ramus is the only one that had a church building. I guess they started meeting inside the temple, though, at some point.
They would meet, by the time Joseph dies, the temple is only like 18 feet high.
Wow.
Just up to the kind of second
floor.
windows.
Yeah.
And so they'd meet outside of the temple. They'd meet in the groves, like over by Young Street. They'd meet over there.
When you have a desire to go hear the words of the prophet or to gather together, the weather is secondary. These people were so committed. I just love their enthusiasm for Nauvoo. This is amazing to me.
There's such a sense of awe for these early saints, for that generation who loved the Lord enough to be way out in a spoke community, come in to listen to the prophet, and to be obedient enough to build the Nauvoo Temple when it wasn't convenient.
Oh, absolutely. An enormous sacrifice.
Enormous sacrifice. Anyway.
That's a beautiful story. And it's so good to reflect on our own commitment as we look at these stories. Whether or not you have any ancestors or relatives of the church history, it is so motivating to me to read their stories and to learn from their experiences. And I pray that the spirit of the temple can be magnified and on fire in our lives as the prophet has called us to go as often as we can, as it was for those saints in Nauvoo and Kirtland. May we rally around and do our best to gather Israel as those early saints did. May we do everything we can to prepare the world for the second coming. Is our prayer today. And we testify of these things in the sacred name of our Savior, Jesus Christ.